we can hear his kirtan, which is available on iskondesire.com. And it's our very good fortune that we are able to hear Srimad Bhagavatam from Prabhu. We got for the first canto, first chapter, we had an opportunity. And now the first canto, second chapter. And in that last class, Prabhuji has mentioned the second chapter is very, very important. And we are so fortunate to get this opportunity to hear from Prabhu, first canto, second chapter, verse number 11 to 20. So let us welcome Prabhu very enthusiastically together, chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra one time. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. His Grace Mukunda Prabhu ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Please, Prabhu.
Okay, so Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtapraishu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishne Swadhamo Bhavate Dharmajnanadiphisaha Kalau Nashtatrashamesha Puranarko Dhunoditaha Om Jnanatimarantasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Atapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Prishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratushe Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhaiva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. All of you, please accept my most respectful obeisances. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak a few words in glorification of Lord Krishna. And as he mentioned in the beginning, it's really maybe the most important section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 2 of the first canto. It is the foundation of everyone's Krishna consciousness. And in particular, from that chapter, this particular passage, texts 11 through 20, it's very clear that we're looking at a specific topic, and that topic is anarthopasamam, the pacification of all of our anarthas. Anartha means things that don't really serve anyone's interest. Illusory attachments, misconceptions, bad habits, superfluous material desires, confusion, laziness, sleep, grief, worry, so many things, all the products of the modes of passion and ignorance that we're so much wrapped up in right now. These things Krishna summarizes in one catch-all term in chapter 7 of Bhagavad Gita, text 28, Dvandva Moha, the bewilderment of mundane duality. And Ichadvesha Samuttena Dvandva Mohena Bharata. On account of this illusion, we are suffering in so many ways. But when we become purified and prasannatma, happy, naturally happy, internally happy, and punyatma, or dharmatma, to become pious by our first nature, not our second nature. We'll read today, Srila Prabhupada writes that we're man-like animals at this point. We look like human beings, but we think and act and desire and sometimes even speak like animals. And so it is the human task to turn us into not only bona fide human beings, which means dharmic individuals, but perfect human beings. And that's very rare. We'll hear more about this. But anyway, the means by which we do this and the process by which this transpires, it's described here in these verses. So we don't have much time, only an hour, and I have 40 pages of notes of commentary that have to be somehow compacted into 1 hour. That comes down to about a minute or so per page. I don't know how it's possible. I'm sure it isn't possible, but we'll try to say focus on some of the key things that Srila Prabhupada says here. So the first verse is text 11. Vadanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yadgyanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdyate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. So before we hear Srila Prabhupada's purport, I would just like to point out Srila Jiva Goswami, who's been called the greatest philosopher of all time, and who certainly gave the most eloquent and comprehensive statement of Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta in the history of our Sampradaya. He compiled his Shatsandarbhas, his 6 philosophical treatises, basically as a commentary on this one verse, Vadanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yadgyanam advayam, which speaks of the 3 ways in which transcendentalists can appreciate the same non-dual absolute, and that is Brahma, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So just to speak on this one verse alone, if it takes 6 volumes in Sanskrit, then how are we going to do it in just a few minutes? Let's hear what Srila Prabhupada says first. Purport: the absolute truth is both subject and object, and there is no qualitative difference there. Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are qualitatively one and the same. The same substance is realized as impersonal Brahman by the students of the Upanishads, localized Paramatma by the Hiranyagarbhas or the yogis, and as Bhagavan by the devotees. In other words, the personality of Godhead is the last word of the absolute truth. Paramatma is the partial representation of Bhagavan, and the impersonal Brahman is his glowing effulgence. Now here Srila Prabhupada writes, very eloquently, I think, less intelligent students of either of the above schools sometimes argue in favor of their own respective realization, but those who are perfect seers of the absolute truth know well that the above 3 features of the one absolute truth are different perspective views seen from different angles of vision. In other words, the same personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, he reveals himself in degrees in accordance with our approach, not in terms of our karma and not by any prejudice on his part, but according to how we approach him, he will reveal himself commensurately. So if we approach him with an impersonal attitude, that's what he will reveal to us. If we approach him with no intention of rendering service, but understanding in some vague way that he is a person, then he will reciprocate with us in a very limited way as Paramatma within the heart. Dhyanavastita manasa pashyanti yam yoginaha. The yogis are doing that. And if we are not only ready to accommodate that the Lord is a person, but we're ready to do something for him, practical, interact, and have loving reciprocations, then he will reveal himself in full. As Brahman, we get an appreciation of the Lord's eternity. his substantial existence, because nothing else exists substantially, only Brahman, spirit. And when we have a more developed understanding, he reveals himself as Paramatma. And when we are ready to surrender to him, then he reveals himself in full. So Srila Prabhupada has said quite a bit here. I don't want to spend too long on each verse, I think just in the interest of time, because it's very limited. I will say one thing is that Srila Jiva Goswami here has pointed out, he's quoting a verse from the 5th count, a very nice verse, to describe the same topic. Canto 5, chapter 12, text 11, he says, "What then is the ultimate truth? The answer is that non-dual knowledge is the ultimate truth. It is devoid of the contamination of material qualities. It gives us liberation. It is the one without a second, all-pervading and beyond imagination. The first realization of that knowledge is Brahman. Then Paramatma, the Supersoul, is realized by the yogis who try to see him without grievance. This is the second stage of realization. Finally, full realization of the same supreme knowledge is realized in the Supreme Person. All learned scholars describe the Supreme Person as Vasudeva, the cause of Brahman, Paramatma, and others." And then he quotes again from the, where is this? "Namastubhyam bhagavate brahmane paramatmane nayatra shruyate maya loka srishti vikalpana." My obeisances unto you, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, the Supreme Soul, within whom there is no trace of the illusory energy, which orchestrates the creation of this material world. So here's the point. Although the Lord is a person, he's not the kind of person that burns us out in this material world. All of us have been singed by toxic people in this material world. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada writes in Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, text number 10, in his glorious purport to that verse, which I highly recommend everyone study carefully a few times. He says, well, what does Krishna say? First of all, I might as well quote that verse. Vitaraga bhaya krodha manmaya mamupashataha bahavo jnanatapasa putamad bhavamagataha. That verse itself is the subject of an entire seminar, but fear, attachment, fear, and anger, these three things, Srila Prabhupada says, they snag us. They keep us bound in this material world. We have attachments to non-devotional things, anything non-devotional interests we are attached to. And that snags us. It keeps us riveted to this material world. And we have fear. And Srila Prabhupada is very insightfully chosen to dilate on that. What does it mean? What is our fear? What are we afraid of, actually? And Prabhupada says we're afraid of being persons. So naturally, when we hear that the Supreme Lord is a person, wait a minute, I've had enough of people in my life. You can get to that point if you're not there yet. It's true. So we have a fear of personal existence. We have a fear of emotional exchange, especially if we hear that these things are absolutely real and eternal. That's a little bit fearful for many people. And that's why they become mayavadis. That's why people become impersonalists and yogis. Anything but, facing my fear head on. And anger. Anger is even worse than that. After we've had so much bad experience in this world, we become angry. Or we become confused. Srila Prabhupada he's kind of interpreted anger in that verse to mean frustration. We've heard so many things, we've seen so many things, we're so confused about everything that we just don't want to have anything to do with it, and we just take shelter of YouTube or something, intoxication or whatever, so many different forms of sense gratification that people take shelter of in order to escape the reality. that they're suffering. So this attachment, fear, and anger, Krishna says, many people in the past, they have transcended this. And the implication is that you can also transcend this. Many people became past by hearing about me. This is the point. Vitaraga bhaya krodham mayamam upashritaha, by taking shelter of me. Bahuvo jnana tapasa puta madbhavam agata. And when they're purified by hearing about me, by the austerity of knowledge, it's a little difficult sometimes to embrace real knowledge because, as we've described already, not only is it a little bit frightening, the unknown is always a little bit frightening, but it's difficult to acquire knowledge. You have to work. And once you acquire knowledge, then what do you have to do with that knowledge? You have to apply it. Otherwise, you become a hypocrite and someone else gets angry at you. So it's a little bit weighty proposal here, what Krishna is presenting to us. But he says, if we take shelter of him, if we hear from him, if we surrender to him, puta, to the extent that we become purified by this process, what happens then? Madbhavam agata. And many people have come to this stage. Bhava bhakti. Real love of God. So, thus regaining your natural position in rendering service unto the Supreme Lord, who is the all-powerful reservoir of all pleasure and who lives in all living entities as the Supersoul, you will very soon forget the illusory understanding of I and mine. This is from the fourth canto. Still, Jiva Goswami is quoting these things. All right, I'm going to have to go on. There's so much more that he says that we could dilate on, but I'm going to skip ahead to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He tells us, what is this supreme person? And on the authority of Parashar Muni, in Vishnu Purana, he gives us a definition of Bhagavan. Aishwaryasya samagrasya viryasya yashashastriyaha jnana vayagya yoshcheva shannamiti bhaga itingana jnana shakti balaishwarya viryate jangsya sheshataha bhagavat chabdavachyani vinaheyayar gunadibhihi. Very nicely, he describes. Even though he is pure Gyan, Paramatma is also the shelter of the particularization of Gyan because he performs functions such as acting as the witness. He's like a sun or a lamp. Although the sun is the very form of light, it also possesses light. In the same way, although Paramatma is himself Gyan, he's personifying that Gyan at the same time. So there's no contradiction there. We're talking about all these things are speaking of Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Brahman. Jnanam is called Bhagavan by the devotees. It's called Advayam because the Shakti and the Shaktiman are one and the same. He adds, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Although Bhagavan is pure Gyan, as the yogis and Gyanis agree, he has a form possessing the 6 qualities described by the word Bhaga, which is non-material. And because the form is pure consciousness, it's stated like this in the Vishnu Purana. Bhagavan means all knowledge, all wisdom, all beauty, all fame, all renunciation, all power, etc., etc. These 6 opulences are there. Okay, so the Jnani who selects the general form of the Lord is qualified for Brahman. He is a spiritualist. That's as far as he's willing to go. I'm spiritual. He wants to be spiritual, but he doesn't want to know anything about that spirit. And he doesn't want to do anything about that spirit. So he gets Brahman. That's so-called Brahmananda. Not really full of very much Ananda, but it is relief from the miseries of material existence. The yogi who accepts the Lord as the soul within all beings and who possesses qualities and who is different from the jiva, that person is qualified for realizing Paramatma. So he's a little bit more advanced than the impersonalist, but he's not quite arrived at the threshold of the house of bhakti, so to speak. And the devotee who actually accepts the Lord completely, he embraces the Lord with his whole heart and He understands that the Lord possesses inconceivable, infinite form of knowledge and bliss with no material flaws whatsoever and infinite qualities and pastimes. That devotee is qualified for realizing Bhagavan. So this is the purport of this very, very important verse. As I've been mentioning, there are so many verses here quoted to back up all these arguments by our acharyas. If you're really eager to hear, you can look them up on your own. For now, we better move ahead to text number 12. Tat shraddhathanam munayo jnana vairagya yuktaya pashyantyatmani chatmanam bhaktya shruta grihitaya. Very, very important point here. He says, the seriously inquisitive student or sage, well equipped with knowledge and detachment, realizes that absolute truth by rendering devotional service in terms of what he has heard from the Vedanta Shruti. So first thing, we have to be seriously inquisitive. That's the austerity of knowledge that Krishna mentions back in chapter 4, text 10 of Bhagavad Gita. And we have to be equipped with knowledge and detachment. Where are we going to get those from? If you've been listening very carefully, you know this already, because it's been stated in this second chapter that automatically janayati ashu vairagyam cha jnanam cha, when we render devotional service, that is ahaitaki bhakti, without any hetu, no motive, no agenda, no expectations. When we do that, then automatically we gain detachment from the world and knowledge of everything as it is. So if we're seriously inquisitive, we have knowledge and detachment, then we can realize that Lord through devotional service. If that devotional service is rendered in terms of what we've heard from Vedanta Shruti, or in our case, more likely, Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada writes here, Brahman and Paramatma realization of the absolute truth is but partial. As we mentioned already, Brahman, we can realize his eternity aspect. Paramatma, we get eternity and knowledge, both. But only with Bhagavan do we get Sat, Chid, and Ananda. Therefore, Bhagavan is the most complete revelation. Now, Prabhupada writes, there are 4 different types of human beings: karmis, jnanis, yogis, and devotees. The karmis, they are the materialists, whereas the other 3 are transcendentalists to one degree or another. And then he points out, very, very interesting, about midway through his purport, he says, as Brahman and Paramatma realization are imperfect realizations of the absolute truth, so the means of realizing Brahma and Paramatma, that is to say the paths of Jnana and Yoga, are also imperfect means of realizing the absolute truth. Very nicely put. Then he says, devotional service, which is based on the foreground of full knowledge, combined with detachment from material association, and which is fixed by oral reception of the Vedanta Shruti, is the only perfect method by which the seriously inquisitive student can realize the absolute truth. So even amongst the devotees who are put in a class above the Jnanis and the Karmis and the Yogis, even among devotees, there are 3 classes: first class, second class, third class. They're sometimes called Kanishta, Madhyama, and Uttama devotees. The Kanishta devotees, they're only attracted by the external features of, say, deity worship, or they like prasadam, or they find that Krishna Katha is very entertaining. They're looking at it in terms of sense gratification. So they're also devotees because they're willingly participating and they accept the ideal to some degree, at least theoretically. Second-class devotees, they have deepened their faith to the extent that they recognize the importance of cultivating knowledge, embracing the principle of jnana tapasya, as we mentioned already, and they have studied the scripture, and so they're able to discriminate very carefully who is a devotee, who is a non-devotee, who's innocent, who's envious, like this. And the Uttama Adhikari, the most advanced devotee, he sees everything as Krishna conscious because he is so full of Krishna consciousness. So he has full scriptural knowledge. His faith is unbreakable. And he's completely realized. More often than not, he's in direct touch with the Supreme Lord himself. So these are three classes of devotees. And even amongst them, we have to very carefully assess what is a person's situation. Especially, we have first and foremost, we have to assess what is my situation? Where do I stand? Prabhupada writes here, a third-class devotee, therefore, has to receive the instructions of devotional service from the authoritative sources of the Bhagavata. The number one Bhagavata is the personality of the devotee, mainly the spiritual master. In our case, we can say Srila Prabhupada. And the other Bhagavatam is the message of Godhead, the book. So there's Book Bhagavata, and there's Grantha Bhagavata and Sevak Bhagavata, the two kinds of Bhagavatas. Now, the problem is this, that the neophyte devotee, we're talking about Kanishta Adhikaris, the neophyte devotee, Prabhupada writes, has very little taste for hearing from the authorities. So where does he go to hear? Instead of hearing from a bona fide authority, he heads for Loi Bajar, Raspi Harilal bookstore, and he finds something nectar to entertain himself. Such a neophyte devotee, Prabhupada continues, makes a show of hearing from the professional man to satisfy his senses. The professional speaker is also satisfying his senses. He's making money doing that. And the so-called audience is also, they're just there for the nectar. They want to get some entertainment, so you hear some cool stories. So this sort of hearing and chanting, Prabhupada writes, has spoiled the whole thing. So one should be very careful about the faulty process. I'm quoting Srila Prabhupada here. So, and then he paraphrases that verse from Sanatana Goswami. Milk is always sweet, but if you take milk from the lips of a snake, then you may be poisoned. So, putam harikathamritam. One should not hear from non-devotees. Many, many non-devotees who speak so eloquently, so learned, wonderful pronunciation of Sanskrit, beautiful literary articulation, all these things. But if they're not devotees, they cannot help you to actually purify your heart and to realize Bhagavan. You'll only get your mind stimulated, or you'll get your emotions titillated, or somehow you'll be satisfied. We see this all the time in Vrindavan, so much. We call it, there's a word for it in English, infotainment. So that's not real hearing. Here Prabhupada writes, without hearing such literatures, one cannot make actual progress. You have to hear, first of all. And you have to hear from the right person, as we've been describing, from the pure devotee, not from the non-devotees, or even from the mixed devotees. The benefit is less than it is from hearing from pure devotees. And then, without hearing and following the instructions, the show of devotional service becomes worthless, and therefore a sort of disturbance in the path of devotional service. Hearing means acting. If you receive an instruction by opening Srimad Bhagavatam, then you're faced with a choice to make. Just like one of my godbrothers gave the analogy, when you take a lift or an elevator in a tall building, then the elevator door opens and you have to make a choice. You don't have to get out of the elevator. You can stay in the elevator, but it's understood that that door is closing and you're going somewhere else. So in the same way, karnamanugo gacchati jiva eka. Dhanani pumao pashavascha goshte, nari grihadware, janaha smashane. Your money will stay in the bank, your car will stay in the garage, your wife will stay in the house, your friends and relatives, they'll come to your funeral maybe, and your body goes as far as the funeral pyre. But if you have trod upon the path of karma instead of bhakti, then my friend, you're going on alone. And there's no choices to make after this big door slams shut. You cannot make any choices. So we have to use the time that we have while we are human beings very wisely, because death is coming for every one of us. We're marked men. Likhitam api lalate pronsitam kahasamartha. Who is able to overcome? It's already written on your forehead when you're going to die. On Ekadashi, that's yesterday. One devotee came out of the temple, walked out the gate after Mangalarti, and dropped dead on the spot in Vrindavan. So he was lucky. He was in Vrindavan. He could have been in, well, you can fill in the blanks. So this is the point. Jaba laga thana mein tapana vyapai, taba laga kari hari seva. Ek madhyugin ke kavi ne kaha aisa ki while you have the opportunity, while your senses are working, while your mind is in good order, use this opportunity. Use it or lose it, as we say in English. Okay, so the point is, this is all off of Prabhupada's sentence here. Without hearing and following instructions, the show of devotional service becomes worthless and therefore a sort of disturbance. Unless, therefore, devotional service is established on the principles of Shruti, Smriti, Purana, or Pancharatra authorities, make show of devotional service should at once be rejected. If someone proposes something or presents something to us as devotional service, we always have to be very looking, not necessarily critical, I mean to say, but we have to be discriminating. And we have to consider, what is the basis of this claim? Is it based on the Shrutis? Is it based on the Smritis? Is it based on some Purana or some Pancharatric reference? Shastra yonidvat. Everything comes from Shastra. That's a very, very important thing. We have to always know. Anything that someone says, has to be backed up with the appropriate reference. And finally, Prabhupada says, an unauthorized devotee should never be recognized as a pure devotee, because that will spoil everything. Sridhar Swami says, Shrutena Vedantadi Shravanena Grihitaya Praptiyeti Bhaktir Dardhimuktam. If you want pure devotional service, solid devotional service, you have to make the foundation the Shastras. And we're very fortunate Srila Prabhupada has given us all these books to study. All we have to do is open them up. It's surprisingly simple, but simple doesn't always mean easy. As we've already heard from Srila Prabhupada himself, the neophyte devotee has very little taste for hearing from authorities. We would rather hear from someone else. So those are a few things we can think about with regards to that verse. Now it's 3:30 and we're not even done with text number 12 yet, so I better get moving. I'm going to have to skip over so much. The Acharya's commentaries on these verses in particular are so lengthy and very exhaustive treatment they've given here, but the time is very less. So let's go to the next text, 13. Ataha pumbhir dvija shrestha varnashrama vibhagashaha sanushtatasya dharmasya samsiddhir haritoshanam. O best among the twice born, it is therefore concluded that the highest perfection one can achieve by discharging the duties prescribed for one's own occupation, according to caste divisions and orders of life, is to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. First of all, Prabhupada writes, human society all over the world is divided into 4 castes and 4 orders of life. Don't let anyone tell you that, no, we don't have any caste system in America, for example, or in Kuwait, or wherever we are. The caste system is everywhere. You may have a perverted caste system, that wo to hai, parantu the caste system is always there. But these castes are classified in terms of one's work and qualification and not by birth. This is Prabhupada's next claim. The intelligent caste, the martial caste, the productive caste, and the laborer caste, they're all classified in terms of Guna and karma, not just janma. That's a point that doesn't need much belaboring nowadays because no one respects jati anymore anyways. But the point is this, the aim must be, in all these divisions of varnashram, the aim must be to please the supreme authority, the supreme personality of Godhead. This institutional function of human society is known as the system of varnashram. When the aim of life is missed by too much attachment for indriya priti, or sense gratification, the institution of varnashram is utilized by selfish men to pose an artificial predominance over the weaker section. Do we see this? Yes, of course. We see it everywhere. That is the norm now because it's called Yuga. But the saner section of the people know it well that the divisions of the castes and orders are meant for smooth social intercourse and high thinking. That is to say, self-realization, and not for any other purpose. The highest perfection of the institution of varnashram is to cooperate jointly for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Cooperate jointly for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. In other words, as this verse itself states, samsiddhir haritoshanam. Now, I can't miss this opportunity to point out, in 1977, just before Srila Prabhupada left, he gave us basically two final instructions. One instruction, you please cooperatively, you please maintain the institution as I've established it. Don't let it deteriorate. And number two, you cooperate with each other. Your love for me will be shown by how well you can cooperate. Both sustenance and cooperation are the exact functions, the exact requirements, I mean to say, that varnashram is intended to fulfill. So it's not a mistake that in the last 3 years of his physical presence amongst us, Srila Prabhupada gave about 80% of his instructions on the topic of varnashram, because he knew if you want to sustain anything, now, you know, we talk about sustainable technologies and sustainable this and that. Dhre in Sanskrit, the verbal dhatu, dhre, means to sustain something. And the word dharma comes from that verbal root. It indicates, the very word itself indicates sustenance. If you want to maintain and you want smooth cooperation, as Srila Prabhupada has just written here, this is what you have to do. Otherwise, it does not work. And do we see this? Yes, we do see it. Everything is fractious in modern society, even amongst devotees, because this instruction is not taken very seriously. We hear the instruction, but we don't apply the instruction, as we've already described. So, tasmad haritoshanam eva tasya paramam phalamityaha. Datta. Jiva Goswami says, this verse begins with the word ataha, therefore, because he's indicating what is the supreme fruit of this endeavor, haritoshanam. You have to cooperate to please our Father. Like so many siblings, they cooperate to please the Father. If they're all fighting over the Father's body while he's sick, then what kind of cooperation is that? Okay. And of course, he doesn't miss the opportunity. Srila Prabhupada is always pointing this thing out. Shrama eva hi kevalam. If we only do our dharma, but do not come to the point of haritoshanam, pleasing Lord Hari, then shrama eva hi kevalam. It's just a waste of time. Hard work for nothing. All right. There's a lot more. Jiva Goswami in particular has very extensive commentary, but the time is very less. Anyway, as all the dharmas are perfected by bhakti, so it's not actually necessary for pure devotees to perform dharma, but in most cases it's necessary to perform dharma in order to become pure devotees. This is the idea. If somehow or other you are already a pure devotee, or if you can somehow or other by divine grace practice pure devotional service without it, then it's not really essential. It's an external thing, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said. But Srila Prabhupada seemed to feel it was very important, and that's why he gave so many instructions on it. And then he quotes, Jiva Goswami quotes the 11th canto. Tavat karmani kurvita nanirvidyeta yavatha madkatha shravanada va shraddha yavan najayate. As long as you have not been satiated by fruit of activity, have not awakened a real taste for shravanam, kirtanam, etc., then you have to act very strictly according to the regulative principles. That is to say, you have to do dharma. Karma and dharma in Vedic literature, they are synonymous terms. So that's a famous verse. It's very often quoted as well. All right, so text 14. Tasmad ekena manasa bhagavan sattvatam patihi shratavya kirtitavyascha jaya pujascha nityada. 4 things we should do always. We should hear about Bhagavan. We should chant his glories. We should meditate upon him. And we should worship him. And how do we do this? Ekena manasa, with all our hearts. One pointed attention. Vyavasayatmika buddhi. We should fix our attention on this. Therefore, with one pointed attention, one should constantly hear about, glorify, remember, and worship the personality of Godhead, who is the protector of the devotees. Prabhupada writes here, if realization of the absolute truth is the ultimate aim of life, it must be carried out by all means. In any one of the above mentioned castes and orders, these 4 processes are general. Without these principles of life, no one can exist. Activities of the living being involve engagements in these 4 different principles of life. Now, it's interesting what Prabhupada says next. There's a very famous quote here. He says, especially in modern society, all activities are more or less dependent on hearing and glorifying. You'll recognize this immediately, so listen carefully. Any man from any social status becomes a well-known man in human society within a very short time if he is simply glorified truly or falsely in the daily newspapers. Sometimes political leaders of a particular political party are also advertised by newspaper propaganda. And by such a method of glorification, an insignificant man becomes an important man within no time. But such propagation by false glorification of an unqualified person cannot bring about any good, either for the particular man or for the society. There may be some temporary reactions to such propaganda, but there are no permanent effects. Therefore, such activities are a waste of time. Sridhar Swami writes, Yasmatcha bhakti hino dharma kevalam shrama eva tasmad bhakti pradhana eva dharmonashthaya ityaha tasmad. Why do we say tasmad again here? He wants to make it very clear that this is a conclusion. The best thing you can do by performing dharma in any form is to awaken your Bhagavad Bhakti. Without that bhakti, all this so-called dharma is just a waste of time. This has already been stated, so we'll move on. Text 15. It's getting interesting now. This is the good part. Yarano dhyasina yukta karma granthina bandhanam chindanti kovedas tasya ko na kuryat katharatim. It's a rhetorical question. With sword in hand, intelligent men cut through the binding knots of reactionary work, karma, by remembering the personality of Godhead. Therefore, who will not pay attention to his message? Purport. The contact of the spiritual spark, that is us, the soul, with material elements creates a knot which must be cut if one wants to be liberated from the actions and reactions of fruit of work. Liberation means freedom from the cycle of reactionary work. Liberation automatically follows for one who constantly remembers the transcendental pastimes of the personality of Godhead. This is because the activities of the Supreme Lord, that is to say his Leela, are transcendental to the modes of material energy. They are all attractive spiritual activities, and therefore constant association with the spiritual activities of the Supreme Lord gradually spiritualizes the conditioned soul and ultimately severs the knot of material bondage. We're all tied up, as we've been describing. We're all bound to this material world by one flavor of Maya or another, by one mode of materialistic existence or another. And Krishna says in chapter 15 of Bhagavad Gita, it's like a banyan tree. Banyan trees are very hard to find, the original root. There's one banyan tree in the Kolkata Botanical Garden. It's about a square mile wide. Nobody knows where did this thing originally come from. So in the middle of that tree, how are you going to find your way out? You have only to cut. So then he goes into practical strategies. Even the reactionary work of the fruitive workers can lead one to liberation when it is overcoated with devotional service. That is to say, karma overcoated with devotional service is called karma yoga. Similarly, empirical knowledge overcoated with devotional service is called jnana yoga. But pure bhakti yoga is independent of such karma and jnana because it alone can not only endow one with liberation from conditional life, but also award one the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Therefore, Prabhupada says, any sensible person should embrace these four principles: hearing about him, glorifying him, remembering him, and worshiping him always without cessation. This is the point. Jiva Goswami says, Kovida vivekinaha. And Kovida means expert. Just like now we have COVID. We're not so expert at keeping away this disease. But actually in Sanskrit, COVID means he knows something. Kaha vid. He knows something. And Jiva Goswami glosses it here as viveki. He's a discriminating person. This is the point. And yukta is also used here in this verse, means sanyata chitta. His consciousness is disciplined. This is necessary. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur adds, the qualification for bhakti is faith in the topics of the Lord. And this is illustrated in the following verse. The first one we've already recited from 11th canto. As long as one is not satiated by fruitive activity and is not awake in faith or taste and hearing, one has to act strictly according to the regulative principles of the Vedic injunctions. Another one he says, a person with natural faith should constantly hear topics about the Lord. He should sing and remember those topics which purify the world and which glorify the Lord's activities and his birth. He should perform dharma, kama, and artha as service to me. You don't have to necessarily give these things up just because bhakti is independent of them. But they should be offered by all means. They must be offered. Yajñarthat karmanonyatra lokoyam karma bandhanaha. Krishna says, if you don't offer them as yajna for the Supreme, then they bind you. So, he's quoting so many more verses. But he sums up, who will not have attraction for topics concerning the Lord, whose remembrance alone cuts the knots of karma? Attraction for these topics arises suddenly in all people before having faith. This verse indicates that a person who is more qualified, who has faith, will be even more attracted. Now, how does this transpire? This is where it gets good. Text 16, Shusho Shadatanasya Vasudeva Katharuchi Syan Mahat Sevaya Vipraha Punyat Tirthana Shevanat. O twice-born sages, by serving those devotees who are completely free from all vice, great service is done. By such service, one gains affinity for hearing the message of Vasudeva. Purport. Prabhupada writes, the conditioned life of a living being is caused by his revolting against the Lord. There are men called devas or godly living beings, and there are men called asuras or demons who are against the authority of the Supreme Lord. And these things are all described at length by the Lord in chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita. We don't need to dilate on that so much. But devotees are the confidential associates of the Lord. They come to save humanity from the dangers of godlessness. India did not see the threat posed by Muslim invasions about 1,000 years ago. At least that's what I was taught in South Asian history. They just didn't perceive the threat. Just it seems like many people cannot perceive the threat of COVID-19, which is therefore resurging everywhere. And in the same way, it seems the Western world has not really awoken fully to the threat posed by the Communist Party of China. Please excuse me, all you geeks in Shenzhen who are recording this conversation, because it is, after all, on Zoom. But we have to say this. So here Prabhupada is talking about the dangers of godlessness. Godless people cannot understand the dangers of godlessness. And even godly people, if they're not steeped in hearing from Shruti and Smriti and Puranas, they may not recognize godlessness, and they certainly don't always recognize the threat posed by godlessness. But Srila Prabhupada has mentioned this here. Devotees come to this world only to awaken people to this perennial danger, which destroys lives so much in this material world. So because they are so close to the Lord, having assimilated his message and embraced his mission and rendering confidential service to him, they're to be recognized, and they're to be even respected almost as much as the Lord, but they never claim to be the Lord. This is the thing. The servants of God come to propagate God consciousness, Prabhupada writes, and the intelligent people should cooperate with them in every respect. By serving the servant of God, one can please God more than by directly serving the Lord. By serving the servants of the Lord, one gradually gets the quality of such servants, and thus one becomes qualified to hear the glories of God. This is the mystical point of this verse. How do we gain a taste for hearing? If we don't have that taste, we may be impious. Our minds may be overwhelmed. But where is the peace? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes elsewhere, if you're in pain, then an attractive meal doesn't really attract you. If you're suffering physical pain, how can you eat nicely? So here is the answer. Even if we are disturbed in this world, if we somehow or other serve the true Vaishnavas, real Vaishnavas, that is to say the Nishkinchana Vaishnavas and the Nishpapa Vaishnavas, those who are sinless and sold out to the Lord, then we ourselves get a taste for hearing. And once we get a taste for hearing, then automatically we're just carried in that dhara, that great stream of prema pravaha, one poet called it, the stream of love of Godhead. Bhagavatham is a manifestation of that. Now, Sridhar Swami here in his commentary on this verse, Nanu satyameva karma nirmulani harikatharatis tathapi tasyam ruchi notpadyate kim karmas tatraha shushushoriti. This verse is spoken just in case somebody raises the question, okay, well, what am I supposed to do if I don't have a taste? Despite the fact that, the Harikatha will uproot your karmic anarthas, what am I supposed to do? He says, this is the answer to that question. Punya tirtha nishevanam. Serving the punya tirthas means nishpapasya mahat seva. Means rendering massive service to someone who is sinless. Tad dharma shraddha tatas shravanetcha tato ruchi syat ityartha. From that, you gain faith. And from that faith, you develop a desire to hear. And by that hearing, you get a taste. Jiva Goswami develops this point even further. He says, Darshana Sparshana Sambhashanadi Lakshana Seva Swata Eva Sampadyate. In the association of the pure devotees, it is automatic that just by seeing them, just by brushing against them, just by speaking with them momentarily, you can engage in service in one way or another. Maybe agnata sukriti, maybe jnata sukriti. You may know what you're doing or not. Swata eva sampadyate, the opportunity for seva, it arises. And tat prabhavena cha, tadyacharane shraddha bhavati. From that powerful influence of the association of pure devotees, you develop some faith in their characteristics, in their behavior, in their way of life. Tadiya swabhavika paraspara bhagavat kathayam kimete sankathayanti tatshrinomi iti taricha jayate. When you see how they're speaking amongst themselves spontaneously, naturally, eagerly, sharing their realizations of Krishna Katha, then you get the idea, the desire arises in your mind that what what's behind their discussions? What are they talking about? Let me hear. I want to know, what is this? Tat shravanena chatasyam ruchir jayate. And from that hearing, ruchi will arise. Tatacha mahadpya eva shruta jhatiti karya kariti bhava. It happens very quickly. And then Jiva Goswami closes his commentary quoting a very famous verse, 3rd canto, chapter 25, text 25, which some of you, I hope, know. Satam prakasangan mama virya samvido bhavanti hritkarna rasayana katha tad joshanada shvapavarga vartmani shraddhara tir bhaktir anukramishyati. In the association of devotees, hearing takes on a life of its own. It becomes powerful. Virya samvid bhavanti. And hritkarna rasayana katha. We spoke earlier about infotainment that can titillate only the mind and the heart and the intelligence. But this is like a medicine for the ear as well as for the heart. Heart meaning the soul. It can cure the disease of material existence when we hear from the powerful topics of the realizations of pure devotees in their company. Tad joshanat, from that enthusiasm or from that taste, ashu apavarga varshmini, we're very quickly placed on the path of liberation, taking us out of this material world. And what are the mileposts upon that path? It begins with Shraddha and it ends in Rati Bhakti, Anukramashiti. Step by step, Kramataha, we go through Shraddha, then Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, Anartana Vritti. That's what this whole section that we're discussing today, it's basically on Anartana Vritti. And then Nishtha, and then we get Ruchi, and then Asakti, and then Bhava, and finally Prema. It's a great science. The whole Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu has been written only to elaborate on that science. We don't have time to go into the very, very lengthy commentaries on this 3rd canto verse as well. 3:25:25. It's a good verse to remember. Okay. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, hear how the attraction for topics of the Lord arises. It arises by service to the great devotees, caused by the good fortune of mercy of those great devotees. So it's only by divine grace. By that one develops faith, shraddhanasya. By faith, one takes shelter of the feet of a pure guru, punya tirthane shevanat. According to Amarakosh, tirtha means water worshipped by sages, guru, path or cause. So being eager to hear those topics, shushrusho, he develops taste for those topics. Shushrushu. Shushrushu means not only eager to serve, but eager to hear as well. Literally, the meaning is eagerness to hear. All right. Text 17. Shinvatam sukata Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridyantasto hyabhadrani vidhunoti suhritsatam. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is Paramatma in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. Prabhupada writes in his purport, messages of the personality of Godhead are not different from him. Whenever, therefore, offenseless hearing and glorification of God are undertaken, it is to be understood that Lord Sri Krishna himself is present in the form of transcendental sound. We have already discussed developing a taste for hearing and chanting the holy sound. It is done through the medium of service to the pure devotee. The Lord is reciprocally respondent to his devotees, responsive, in other words. When he sees that a devotee is completely sincere in getting admittance to the transcendental service of the Lord, and has thus become eager to hear about him, the Lord acts from within the devotee in such a way that the devotee may easily go back to him. Now, Prabhupada reminds us of what we really need to be reminded of. Most of us do not desire at all to go back to Godhead. There's a famous story, one devotee, it was known on at such and such a time, he will go back to Godhead. And so he made open invitation. Anyone wants to go back to Godhead, just meet me at this time and place. You can come with me, no problem. Free ticket back to Godhead. Nobody showed up. But anyone who desires to go back to Godhead, Sri Krishna helps in all respects. Prabhupada writes, only very few men want to go back to Godhead. But if anyone desires, Krishna helps him in all respects. Jo kuch bhi zarurat hogi. Ananyas chintayanto mam ye jana paripasate tesham nityabhyuktanam yogakshemam mahamyaham. There's so many verses are there. Dadami buddhi yogam tam ityadi. So it is not surprising that we become distracted by two things in particular. One, money. The other one, sex. These two things. Why? Because Prabhupada says, every living being is associated with such things since remote time, practically immemorial. And it takes time to recover from this foreign nature. But if one is engaged in hearing the glories of the Lord, gradually he realizes his real position. So this is why Rupa Goswami says, we have to be patient. Patient, enthusiastic, confident of success, strict in following, avoiding non-devotional association, ityadi. 6 things. Now, Sridhar Swami here, he says satam, because we're talking about satam prasangan mama virya samvido. He says here, satam means suhrid jitakari, the actual well-wisher who is at heart concerned about you. This is satam, hearing from such persons. And abhadrani means vasana, all this mental stuff that we've been carrying around with us for God only knows how many lifetimes. These are all the inauspicious things in the heart, but they will be destroyed. Make no mistake about it. They will be destroyed. They will be destroyed. It is guaranteed. You should be absolutely confident. If you just stay in the boat, stay with the devotees, and follow the process according to this advice, with patience, with diligence, with faith, etc. All these things will go away. It is guaranteed. All right, there's more that we can say, but we have to finish up. I don't know how much time we have. It's 4 o'clock by my time, so it's been an hour. So tell me what to do. Do we have time to finish 2 more verses?
Yes, Prabhu. Please, Prabhu. Please.
Sorry?
Yeah, Prabhu, we can go ahead.
I'm not able to hear anyone.
Complete 2 verses.
Nobody in charge here? Okay, I'm taking charge.
Prabhu, yes, Prabhu, we can go ahead, Prabhuji. We can complete 2 verses, Prabhu.
Only 2 verses. All right. Text 18. Nashta praishu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. By regular attendance in the classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering of service to the pure devotee. We've just heard about that, haven't we? All that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. Praya means almost. And loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Irrevocable means it cannot be undone. That's very encouraging. Think about the meaning of this word, irrevocable. It means nobody can undo this. Purport, Prabhupada writes, here is the remedy for eliminating all inauspicious things within the heart, which are considered to be obstacles on the path of self-realization. Oh my God, tell me about obstacles. Do we not all have so many obstacles? We know very well what is an obstacle. We're all overwhelmed by our obstacle. Everybody has his own particular batch, and we have to deal with it. But Prabhupada is encouraging us here very patiently, very gently. The remedy is the association of the Bhagavatas. There are 2 types. We've already discussed that. The book Bhagavata, the devotee Bhagavata. And then Prabhupada goes on to say, a devotee Bhagavata is as good as the book Bhagavata because the devotee Bhagavata leads his life in terms of the book Bhagavata. That is what defines. We said in the beginning, Shastra Yonedvat, everything comes from Shastra, including the devotee's character. It's not just because I'm a devotee, therefore anything I do is Shastra. No, sir. It has to be coming ultimately from the Shastra. If we lead our life in terms of what the Bhagavatam says, then we can also be considered walking Bhagavatams. Srila Prabhupada was like that. In that sense, Bhagavata book and person are identical. So, by pleasing the devotee Bhagavata, one can receive the benefit of the book Bhagavata. Human reason fails to understand how, by serving the devotee Bhagavata or the book Bhagavata, one gets gradual promotion on the path of devotion. This is what is mystical about Krishna consciousness. You cannot explain this. People who go to Mangalarti, people who get up early and chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra, people who follow the regulative principles, people who are hearing your Srimad Bhagavatam, who only take prasadam, who minimize non-devotional association and render service unto the saints, these people get a particular result that other people do not get. It is axiomatic. You cannot argue with it. It is seen. But you can't explain how is it happening? Because it's mystical. Therefore, Prabhupada writes very cogently, human reason fails to understand how this happens, but it does. And the example is Nadad Muni, which is later on in this same canto. These are the miraculous effects. Miracle. Miraculous means it's a miracle. Sometimes people want to see the Swamis perform some yoga tricks, magic tricks, or some miracles or something. Prabhupada said, a reporter asked him, "What can you show some miracle?" And Prabhupada just waved at a whole room full of former mlechas who had become Vaishnavas. And Prabhupada said, "Is it not a miracle?" These are the miraculous effects of the association of the Bhagavatas. And to understand these effects practically, it should be noted that by such sincere association of the Bhagavatas, one is sure to receive transcendental knowledge very easily, with the result that he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. The more progress is made in devotional service under the guidance of the Bhagavatas, the more one becomes fixed in the transcendental, loving service of the Lord. The messages of the book Bhagavata, therefore, have to be received from the devotee Bhagavata. And the combination of these two, will help the neophyte to make progress on and on. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, by serving the devotees and Bhagavatam, the major portion of Namaparadha, which he defines, that's how he glosses abhadreshu, becomes weakened. Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. Praya means practically everything gone, 90% gone. So nashta prayeshu abhadreshu, all these abhadras, which here Chakravarti Pad is defining as namaparat, they become weakened to the point that they're almost dead. And this weakening of namaparata continues all the way up until the stage of rati, bhava. Text 19, tada rajas tamo bhava kamalo bhadayashtaye cheta eterna vidham stitam sattve prasidati. As soon as irrevocable loving service is established in the heart, the effects of nature's modes of passion and ignorance, such as lust, desire, hankering, etc., disappear from the heart. Then the devotee is established in goodness and he becomes completely happy. Prasannatma, Brahmabhuta Prasannatma, we've heard from Bhagavad Gita. When all the dross is stripped away from all the covering of the soul is stripped away, what shines? Gold, molten gold. Sarvam kaluidam radha, devotees say. A living being in his normal constitutional position is fully satisfied in spiritual bliss. The state of existence is called Brahmabhuta. And he defines it very beautifully, but only implicitly. He just gives the reference without quoting the verse. I'm going to have to expand on this because it's such a beautiful verse. From Canto 4, Chapter 30, Text 20. Prabhupada just mentioned it offhand in passing. But the verse is, Navyavadridhaye yadyo brahmaitad brahmavadibhi nahuhyanti nashochanti nahrishyanti yato gataha. That means always engaging in the activities of devotional service. Devotees feel ever increasingly fresh and new in all their activities. The all-knower, the super soul within the heart of the devotee, makes everything increasingly fresh. This is known as the Brahman position by the advocates of the absolute truth. In such a liberated stage, Brahmabhuta, one is never bewildered, nor does one lament or become unnecessarily jubilant. This is due to the Brahmabhuta situation. Isn't it? If we don't become overwhelmed with depression, then we become stupid and giddy and foolish. This is all because of the anarthas within the heart. A person who has had all these anarthas, prayeshu abhadreshu nashta, who has had them all virtually destroyed, he doesn't have to undergo those vikaras, those changes. So Prabhupada writes in the purport, a devotee is inspired by the super soul within the heart to advance in devotional service in a variety of ways. Not everybody advances in the same way. We all undergo the same process, same trajectory, but in individual ways, because we're all individuals. It's personal. It's almost uncomfortably personal in the beginning. But that is the beauty of devotional service. Every single one of us harbors within our hearts, irrevocably, to use that word again, a specific taste in pure devotional service that only we can supply to the Supreme Lord. He wants the kind of devotion that only we can offer. No one else can offer it. The kind of devotion that I can offer is not the same as the kind of devotion that he will offer or she will offer. Everyone is unique, and that is the beauty of it. So the super soul inspires us how to advance in a variety of ways according to our own personal condition. The devotee does not feel hackneyed or stereotyped, nor does he feel that he is in a stagnant position. In the material world, if one engages in chanting a material name, he will feel tired after chanting a few times. However, one can chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra all day and night and never feel tired. As chanting is increased, it will come out new and fresh. Srila Rupa Goswami said that if he could somehow get millions of ears and tongues, then he could relish spiritual bliss by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. There is really nothing uninspiring for a highly advanced devotee. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that he is situated in everyone's heart and that he helps the living entity forget and remember. By the grace of the Lord, the devotee gets inspiration. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhiyogam tam yenamamu payanti te. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. That's chapter 10, text 10. As stated, Kushala Karmanam, those engaged in auspicious activities in devotional service are guided by the Supersoul, described in this verse as Gya, the one who knows everything, past, present, and future. The Supersoul gives instructions to the sincere, unalloyed devotee on how he can progress more and more in approaching the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Srila Jiva Goswami in this connection says that the Supersoul, the plenary expansion of the Personality of Godhead, exists in everyone's heart, but in the heart of the devotee, he reveals himself as ever increasingly new. Being inspired by him, the devotee experiences increased transcendental bliss in the execution of his devotional service. So this is all something that is just mentioned in passing by Srila Prabhupada. This is how he's defining Brahmabhuta. What does it mean to be Brahmabhuta, liberated in Brahman realization? You have to chase down that reference to actually get all this, because Prabhupada didn't mention any of it. So that Brahman is also called Atmananda, the state of self-satisfaction or the bliss of the self. It's not like the satisfaction of the inactive fool. The inactive fool is in the state of foolish ignorance, whereas the self-satisfied Atmanandi is transcendental to the material existence. The stage of perfection is attained as soon as one is fixed in irrevocable devotional service. Devotional service is not inactivity, but is the unalloyed activity of the soul. The soul's activity becomes adulterated in contact with matter, and as such, the diseased activities are expressed in the form of lust, desire, hankering, inactivity, foolishness, and sleep. A devotee is always in the mode of unalloyed goodness, and therefore he harms no one. But the non-devotee, however educated he may be, is always harmful. A devotee is neither foolish nor passionate. The harmful, foolish, and passionate cannot be devotees of the Lord. However, they may advertise themselves as devotees by outward dress. A devotee is always qualified with the good qualities of God. There's so much we can say about that, but I'm going to skip ahead here. Sridhar Swami, just in passing, I'll mention, he's glossing the term prasidati here as upashamyati. Remember in the beginning, I said, what is the topic of this whole passage? Anartha upasrama. Here Sridhar Swami is confirming, prasidati ka matlab hai upashamyati. The situation is pacified. What situation? This confused situation in our hearts. The overwhelming desires and overwhelming dissatisfaction and despondence and depression and anxiety and grief and lust, anger, greed, madness, envy, illusion, adi. All these things are pacified. Okay, I should finish up now. Text 20. Evam prasanna manaso bhagavad bhakti yogataha bhagavat tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. Thus established in the mode of unalloyed goodness, the man whose mind has been enlivened by contact with devotional service to the Lord gains positive scientific knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the stage of liberation from all material association. Purport. Srila Prabhupada writes in Bhagavad Gita 7.3, it is said that out of many thousands of ordinary men, one fortunate man endeavors for perfection in life. Mostly men are conducted by the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus they are engaged always in lust, desire, hankerings, ignorance, and sleep. Out of many such, quote, unquote, man-like animals, there is actually a man who knows the responsibility of human life and thus tries to make life perfect by following the prescribed duties. And out of many such thousands of such persons who have attained success in human life, one may know scientifically about the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. In the same Bhagavad Gita, 1855, it is also said that scientific knowledge of Sri Krishna is understood only by the process of devotional service, that is bhakti yoga. The very same thing is confirmed herein in the above words. Perfection of human life is attained when one can understand that he's not the product of matter, but is in fact spirit. If only we remember this, whenever we are overwhelmed by any one of these enemies that Prabhupada has named here, specified here, anytime we feel overwhelmed by anything, it is God's grace alone. If we can somehow remember, wait a minute, I am not this material body, and I'm not even this mind. Once when I was a new devotee, I had to go and get a root canal done at the dentist. So the dentist is drilling into my tooth. You know, it's not very comforting when you hear that sound of calcium being bored into by a power drill. So, you know, it was painful. Even they given me some Novocaine. It seemed I had some high tolerance of Novocaine. So, you know, he gave me some more Novocaine. And then he's digging deeper and deeper. So as he's digging into my tooth and I'm feeling pain from the nerves, I'm remembering in my mind, I'm not this body, you know, he's not drilling into me, he's only drilling into my tooth. Then suddenly he drilled deeper and got closer to the root or something, to the nerve. And I really, really felt pain. And I thought, oh my God, now he's got me. This is the problem. This is our problem. If only we can recognize this simple lesson that has been explained in the last hour and a half, practically speaking, in so many different ways. We are not this material body. We are spiritual parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We have an eternal relationship with Him. All we have to do is reconnect, recultivate, revive that dormant but eternal sambandha. And then all this stuff is immediately dissolved. All the problems of material existence. So this is called Brahmabhuta Gyan. A person who actually achieves this Brahmabhuta realization, he's called a Brahmana. But Prabhupada goes on to say here, but that's not the end of it. One cannot be a devotee unless one at least qualifies as a Brahmin. But that is not the end of it. Such a Brahmin has to become a Vaishnava, in fact, to be actually in the transcendental stage. A pure Vaishnava is a liberated soul and is transcendental even to the position of a Brahmana. Very important point also. So foolish men or men with a poor fund of knowledge do not understand the Supreme Lord, and they interpret Krishna according to their respective whims. The fact is, however, that one cannot understand the science of the personality of Godhead unless one is free from the contamination of the material modes, even up to the stage of being a Brahmana. Bhagavad Bhakti Yogataha Prasanna Manasota Eva Mukta Sangasya, Sridhar Swami comments. By practice of bhakti yoga, he becomes prasanna manasa, jubilant naturally jubilant, spontaneously jubilant, innately jubilant. This is Mukta Sangha, because he's freed from all the Sangha. Sangha. What does Sangha mean? Samyak gacchati iti Sangha. All the stuff that goes along with incarceration within a mind-body complex. We all have to undergo this. And when we are freed from that, then the soul is allowed to shine through with no obstruction. That's called Mukta Sangha. Sridhar Swami says, Krishnasya bhajanam kurvataha prasanna manasa utpanna rate rityarthaha. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur adds, just by worshiping Krishna, automatically become jubilant and your love naturally arises. This is the idea being communicated here. Without rati, there could never be constant detachment from objects of material enjoyment. Param drishtva navartate. To give up mundane, so-called happiness in this world, you have to experience something higher. Without that, you cannot be detached. And without constant detachment, there can never be satisfaction in the mind. So he says, the desired result of bhakti has thus been explained. Accompanying results were previously mentioned with janayati ashu vairagnyam cha jnanam cha yadahaitakam. Here, they're also mentioned with the phrase appearance of vairagya, mukta sangasya. Okay, so that is probably where we should stop. I think I've gone over time. But if anyone has any burning questions, we can discuss it further.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. In the limited time you have given this essence of this 10 verses, Prabhuji. Prabhu, one question I have, then Mataji has also raised the hand. Prabhu, you mentioned about the eagerness in hearing